I'm here with Sylvia Whitman, manager and owner of Shakespeare and Company Bookshop, and we're sitting in the wonderful antiquarian room here in the heart of Paris on the left bank on the Rue de la Boucherie, next to the River Seine and the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Thanks so much for meeting with us on behalf of Tin House, Sylvia.
It's a pleasure. We love Tin House here.
It's great to be here. And as we're in the antiquarian, I just thought I'd begin a bit further back in time. There's such a vibrant, rich, and long literary history of the shop that starts back in 1951 with your father, George Whitman, who just celebrated his 97th birthday in great style here. It opened under the name of Le Mistral, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And he'd come over on the GI Bill, is that right?
That's right. He came to Paris in 1947, and he came on the GI Bill. There were a lot of Americans in Paris at that time who could afford to live here because of the GI Bill. And he basically opened a makeshift bookshop in a hotel room on the Boulevard Saint-Michel. And he had books piled to the ceiling, and his door was open at all times, and people would just go in and either exchange a book, buy a book, sell a book, and it was really a bookshop that was a totally unofficial bookshop. And his friend, the wonderful poet Lawrence Ferlinghetti, was also here on the same GI Bill, and they met there, and Lawrence said, "You basically have a bookshop. You should open a real one in Paris and stay here."
Great, and so that's what happened.
Yes.
At this location. Yeah.
Right, so he found this incredible location, which is just incredible because the building is 17th century. It used to be a monastery. It's opposite Notre Dame in the heart of Paris, and it has a very strong atmosphere and soul to it.
I've often heard it said that George is a romantic.
Oh yeah, he's a romantic, but for me he's more a very eccentric wizard.
And there is a previous shop, Shakespeare and Company.
Of course, yes.
And that is one that was on Rue de l'Odéon. It was opened in 1919, if I'm not mistaken, by Sylvia Beach.
By the amazing Sylvia Beach. Yes, she was from Princeton, and of course she was probably the most famous woman in Paris when she was here. And she had all of the great writers from the Lost Generation who spent a lot of time at her bookshop. She, of course, published Ulysses, which I think is, she did so much, but that's one of the greatest things that she did do. And her bookshop was a real mecca for all Anglophone writers and French writers who were in Paris at that time.
Right. And I think it was closed in 1941 of her own volition, in fact, because of the Second World War.
That's right. There's an incredible, very kind of, sort of like it comes out of a film, this scene where a Nazi officer wanted to buy a copy of Finnegan's Wake that she had in the window, and she refused to sell it to him. Right. And he said, I'm going to come back and confiscate all of your possessions if you don't sell me this book. And within 3 or 4 hours, she had, with her friends, moved all of the books out of the bookshop, painted over the front, and closed the bookshop.
Wow.
Very dramatic ending.
Absolutely. And then the name, your father started off with Le Mistral, and Shakespeare and Company as the name and the incarnation of your bookshop now started, I believe, in the 60s. Right?
Yes,
and
he changed the name in the 60s. He said it was a novel in 3 words, and that it's the greatest name for a bookshop. He also spent quite a lot of time with Sylvia Beach in the 50s because they both were very close to Lawrence Durrell, the writer. And he found, like many booksellers, he thought that she was one of the biggest role models for booksellers, and he really looked up to her and was very inspired by everything that she did, particularly by her mentality of having more of a lending library than a bookshop. And George really tried to create that here, and so the first floor is actually just a lending library. Or not even lending, people just sit there and read the books, they're not for sale.
Right, and you've really carried on that legacy and moved it on into the 21st century as well, with the additions and different things that you're doing in all directions, I think. And you spent a good portion of your childhood here in the shop, I think. So you were, in one sense, born here at Shakespeare.
Yeah, almost. I was born in the hospital, which is literally 2 steps away from the bookshop. Yeah, no, I was very lucky to grow up here. It was a total fairy tale existence for a child. Every day I had writers, either the writers in residence or other writers who would just hang out here, like Lawrence Durrell or Ferlinghetti, reading me stories or telling me that I had to read this. You have to read The Hobbit, or
Great.
you are Alice in Wonderland in this bookshop.
Right.
So it was very really wonderful for the imagination to grow up in a place like this. And then I left and went to England, to Scotland, and came back when I was 21.
And at that point became kind of the manager and helped kind of update certain things, I think, in the shop in 2001.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It was totally old-fashioned in a wonderful way, but we did, in 2002, at that point, need a telephone, for example. So we didn't have anything, no telephone, website,
Wow.
nothing. It was
Right.
really, George was the only one who knew where all the books were, and there was no computer system to help. So yeah, I did quite a few changes.
And it seems to me here, as an independent that's been around so long, for so many decades, that you're a family. One of the things that comes back and back to my mind. But you're also a business as an independent bookshop. I mean, how do those two coexist?
Yeah, I think bookshops, actually, independent bookshops are strange types of businesses because, I mean, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, he once said to me something that has always stayed with me. He said, you don't open a bookshop to make money. So there is a side of it which is a business, and you obviously need to make enough money to pay the bills, but it's just not about that at all.
Right.
And I think you definitely feel that here, as you do in other independent bookshops. There's a sense of family within the people that work here, but also with the people that come and visit and the customers. I met with a girl yesterday who told me that she often just comes by the bookshop when she's feeling a little bit low and she wants to feel better. She just sits on the first floor and reads, and sometimes has kind of funny encounters with people. Sometimes she'll sit while someone's playing the piano upstairs, and always she leaves feeling better. And
Right.
and so in a strange way, it's kind of a home, a second home for many, many people. So I think that family sense is kind of very large in that it's the staff, then we have the writers in residence who stay in the bookshop, and then the visitors. And I think George always wanted, my father, he always wanted people to feel at home here.
Wonderful. And you'd mentioned Lawrence Ferlinghetti and, of course, City Lights Books that opened back, I believe, in 1953
Yes.
as a fantastic independent bookshop. Are there some other independent bookshops, perhaps in London or on any of your travels that you like or find intriguing?
Well, yeah, City Lights is definitely very close to our hearts, and George often says that it's our sister bookshop.
Yeah.
At some point, Lawrence and George wanted to swap bookshops every year, which is totally crazy as they are, but it didn't happen, probably luckily for everyone.
But Lawrence comes regularly to visit, so
yeah, and
there's
it's,
a different swapping.
Exactly, and they have an incredible stock.
Yeah.
They're so the way they choose their books for me has been a real learning curve, actually, just watching how they do that. And I have in the past spent quite a lot of time shadowing them and watching how they do it to learn. But then there are many others. I mean, there's a lot of bookshops that I haven't been to yet that I'm dying to go to because of their use of space. Like this one in Holland, which uses an old church.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds incredible. And then there's one in South America which uses an old theatre.
Right.
So I love this idea of having books in these different kinds of spaces. But then, I mean, there's the Strand in New York, which is still in the family, and it's absolutely extraordinary to have that much space filled with books. There's Foyles and Daunts in London that I think are brilliant. And I mean, we're lucky there are so many. And even in Paris, there's 100 bookshops just in the 5th arrondissement alone that are
Unbelievable.
independent, and then there's almost 1,000 in Paris. So we're spoiled for book lovers. This is a really a dream city to be in.
It really is. I think Martin Stone, who's a great bibliophile, said that Paris was the mother lode in
Totally.
terms of
Yeah.
books and having opportunities and to get to books.
I mean, you just look
Yeah.
at the banks of the River Seine, and it's filled
With
lined
bouquinistes,
with bouquinistes.
too.
It's absolutely part of the way of life here, and a part of the decoration of the city.
Absolutely. There's also in the States, I'm thinking of Powell's. There's
Yeah.
all kinds of wonderful shops. There's also Atlantis books on the island of Santorini that may
Yes.
have been inspired a bit by your shop as
Yeah,
well.
that's a group of people who were writers in residence at some point here. That's another one I'm dying to. I could do just a voyage of the world, just going to independent bookshops. That would be wonderful.
So, just out of curiosity, for you as a bookseller for almost the past decade and having it in your blood as a child, what are some ingredients of being a good bookseller, as you are?
Well, I am constantly learning that recipe. It's, one thing that's interesting when you work in a bookshop is how much you learn from your customers. And I'm always learning from the writers that come here. We always ask them recommend some good poetry books that we should order. So there's just a constant sense of learning, and that's one of the reasons I love working in this space. But I think there's a lot of, most of the staff that work here, what I admire the most about them is when I overhear them recommending books to customers, and that really is when they come into their own.
Right.
And if it's quiet enough, they will spend hours with a customer going through, explaining their story, telling them, just trying to find the right book to put into those people's hands. And I know that a lot of the staff say that that's one of the more challenging sides of working in a bookshop, but also one of the most satisfying. And they all create their own personal relationships with different customers who like their recommendations and come back for more. So I think that's really the main one, the absolute most important ingredient.
And it sounds like a good recipe to continue, for the continuation of independence in a time that's not so easy with technology and the economy and certain things that are happening.
In the last year, it's been incredible how much I and we here have been asked about the threat of the ebook and how we feel and everything. But I don't know, recently I saw some statistics about 2010 that a dozen new independent bookshops opened up in New York.
Wonderful.
In 2010.
That's fabulous, yeah.
And on the other side of that, you see 2 Waterstones closed in Ireland, in Dublin, a few weeks ago. Barnes and Noble now are concentrating so much on the ebook that they just sacked a lot of their staff who work with the physical book. And a lot of borders have been closing down. I think the big chains are definitely the ones that are most at threat in terms of Amazon and the ebook. I feel really strongly that the independent bookshop will still exist in many years to come, and that the physical book will still exist. And I'm not at all I have an iPhone, I'm not at all an anti-technology person, and a lot of my friends have an ebook, but they also have a wonderful library. I think the two can go hand in hand, and I don't believe that enough people in the world just want to stay at home buying things on the internet, reading things on screens. It's so much, an independent bookshop is so much more than that. It's a meeting place. People come here, they don't know anyone, and they meet friends here. They discover books completely by chance, probably fallen from the top of a tower of books, and then they think, oh, well, I've never heard of this, I want to buy it. It's a whole experience of walking into that space, and it's sort of a safe space, and you can spend hours there, It's just this, for me, there's no chance that, I feel adamant we're going to stay here. You know, it's no enough. I think enough people love the physical book and the space that they are contained in.
I would agree with that, and I think that's a perfect time perhaps to visit the shop a little
Yeah,
bit now.
let's do it.
And thank you so much for your time. Wonderful. Thank you.
Pleasure.